Okay, so it is 7 p.m. and we will call the meeting to order. My name is Dave Beelan. I'm the chair of the Lafayette Open Space Advisory Committee. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this special joint meeting to discuss the Mayhoffer management plan. We are going to start with a call to order and a roll call, starting with Boulder County Open Space.
Yes, my name is Trace Baker. I'm acting chair for Boulder County Parks and Open Space Advisory Committee. James Krug, our normal chair, has recused himself for a potential conflict of interest. So I will call the roll for Boulder County. Jen Archuleta.
Present. Hey Trace, I'm just gonna interrupt you just real quick.
Sure.
My name is Nick Brockman. I'm web administrator with Boulder County, and I just wanted to provide a little bit of technical assistance for those that might be joining the webinar. We do have 2 Spanish interpreters that are going to be helping us out. So if you would like to listen in Spanish, if you hover your mouse over the Zoom window down in the bottom right-hand corner, there should be a globe icon, and that will allow you to listen in Spanish. And I believe it even gives you the option, if you would like to continue listening to the background audio, you have that option depending on your settings there. We have turned off chat, so participants are unable to chat with us as the people that are kind of with the board members. But if you do need to communicate with us, I'll turn that on here in just a second. We just ask that you don't use that for public comment. When we come to the portion of the meeting when we'll ask for public comment, we'll ask you to use the raise hand feature, and then we can call you on there. So thank you very much. That's what I have. Continue on, Trace.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Let's see, we had Jen is present, Trace is present, Paula Fitzgerald. Janet George.
Present.
Tony Lewis.
Present.
Steve Myrich.
Present.
Ann Obenchain.
Present.
And Heather Williams. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trace. Thank you, Boulder County Open Space, for being here tonight. And Nick, thanks again for the intro user information for the people on the committee, or on the meeting tonight. We'll go next to the Lafayette Open Space Advisory Committee. Sometimes you may see us abbreviated as LOSAC, LOSAC, Lafayette Open Space Advisory Committee. I think for tonight's meeting, we'll try to refer to us as Lafayette to distinguish us from Louisville, who has a very similar acronym, but not exactly the same. So from Lafayette Open Space Committee, I'm Dave Beelan, chair, and it looks like we have from our committee, Lynn Riedel, our co-chair. We have Allison Ham, a member. We have Josh, Josh Kuhn, a member. And I think that's everyone from the committee, unless I missed someone. And then we have our staff liaison and superintendent, Rob Burdine from the city. And also our planning commission liaison, Joe Smith, who's here tonight. Thanks for joining us, Joe. And I will now move on to the Louisville Open Space Advisory Board for their roll call.
Sure. So I'm vice chair of the Louisville Open Space Board. And I see here on the list, we have Peter Gowan, David Blankenship, Thomas Neville, Helen Moshak, and myself, Charles Danforth. We also have, I think I saw Ember Brignall down there, who is one of our staff people and general brains of the operation. There we go.
Terrific. Thank you, Charles. And thanks, Louisville, for being here tonight. We will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the presentation from the about the Mayhoffer Farm Management Plan from University of Colorado master's students Ethan Abner, Jenna Van Gerwen, and Kara Potter. So I will have them give us their presentation. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
And Dave, this is Tina Nielsen. I'm staff liaison with Boulder County Parks and Open Space. And I'd like to just step in here and make a quick introduction for members of the public who might not be familiar. I know that the students have given an overview presentation to each of the 3 advisory boards, but I just wanted to give a very quick update and introduction. The University of Colorado Master of the Environment program has a capstone requirement for their students, and the 3 agencies, Boulder County, City of Lafayette, and City of Louisville, about a year ago right now, put an RFP, submitted an RFP to the MENV capstone program with the idea of this management plan. And we were selected, and we feel very lucky that we got matched with 3 very excellent students who have a range of interests and knowledge that they have brought to bear. And they've done some really innovative things that are outside of the usual procedures that each of our agencies have normally pursued when we're doing a management planning process. So you'll get a taste of that tonight. The first of which is this joint meeting with the 3 advisory committees. And so I want to thank you all for your willingness to try this out, especially in a virtual format. The academic calendar is compressed, and we thought that avoiding additional meetings at this stage would be helpful for the students, and then everyone gets to hear the same information, and you'll all benefit from hearing each other's deliberations as well, which I think could be really interesting. And the other innovations, just quickly, is that the students have done over the usual and extraordinary outreach into communities that are typically underrepresented. And so you'll hear a little bit about that, actually a lot about that tonight. And then this is also our very first try at doing live interpretation in a meeting. So we're really excited about that. And for those of you who are tuning in and listening in Spanish, we'd really love to hear your feedback on how it went for you. And so whether you do that through the chat or follow-up messages, we would very much appreciate hearing your thoughts about how that went. So that's it for me. I'll just turn it over to the 3 students and they'll take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina, for that introduction. I will go ahead and share my screen of the presentation. All righty. Can everyone see the presentation slide? Wait. All right, then I can go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jenna Van Gerwen, and I'm one of the students on the project team from CU Boulder's Masters of the Environment program. Thank you for taking the time to join us at this public hearing. This presentation is going to provide an overview of the property, the plan development process, key aspects of the draft plan, and the recommended trail alignment as it currently exists in the draft plan. And Nick from Boulder County Parks and Open Space will help with providing any technological assistance during the presentation. There we go. So before we get started, I would like to take the time to introduce my colleagues and our partners. Ethan, Kara, and I are all graduate students in the Masters of the Environment program, like I said before. And our interdisciplinary degree program is designed to produce students with the skills to address complex environmental problems. So as part of our program, students partner with an organization to support their work on particular projects over the course of about a year, like Tina said, and to develop professional skills. So we were very fortunate to be selected by our partners at Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville to draft the Mayhoffer Farm Open Space Management Plan. Each of us has different specializations that bring a broader perspective to environmental issues. So I'm, for example, specializing in sustainable planning and management. Kara is specializing in sustainable food systems, and Ethan is specializing in environmental and natural resource policy. And all three of us will be graduating in just 2 short months in December 2021. Throughout this project, we've been working with Tina Nielsen, the Special Projects Manager at Boulder County Parks and Open Space, Rob Birding, the Lafayette Open Space Superintendent, and Ember Brignall, the Louisville Open Space Superintendent. And the support and guidance from Tina, Rob, and Ember, and all of the staff from their departments have informed this land management plan that we are presenting today. So to get started, the Mayhoffer Farm open space property encompasses 165 acres of open space and forms part of the vital urban buffer between the cities of Lafayette and Louisville, and is jointly owned and managed by Boulder County, the city of Lafayette, and the city of Louisville. Here on this slide is an aerial view of what the property currently looks like and where it's located. So it lies between the crossroads of Empire Road and 95th Street. The Mayhoffer Farm property is shown in that lighter green color, while the adjacent property, Harney-Lastoka, is shown in that brighter green. So the open space consists of primarily agricultural lands with 3 properties that used to be previously a part of the land, but now are privately owned and are shown as conservation easements, CE, or restrictive covenant on that map to the right. Some other big things that we just kind of wanted to help or to point out to help everyone orient themselves includes the wetland that was made from that coal mine down there on the bottom right. The water treatment facility that's located right in the middle of the property. And then lastly, just that sports complex that's on the Harney-Lastoka property, just because that's such a popular destination in that area. And basically, future trails are intended to connect these 2 properties while also providing educational opportunities on both cultural and historical background. So just to provide some background on the property was a high priority land acquisition for Boulder County and the cities of Lafayette and Louisville. Before Boulder County, Lafayette and Louisville acquired the property, it was owned and maintained by the Kerr and then later the Mayhoffer families for more than 100 years. After a decade of discussion with the Mayhoffer family about Louisville and Lafayette's mutual desire to protect the Mayhoffer farm property as open space, and 2 years of deliberation between the family, real estate developers, and the 3 agencies, the property was finally purchased in 2017 for a bit over $8 million. For that, Boulder County paid 50% of the purchase price, while Louisville and Lafayette each paid 25%. Collaboration between the 3 agencies and high investment in the land reflected the importance of the property for the local communities. Since acquisition in 2017, the history of farming has been carried into the present day by a lease that expanded agricultural operations from that adjacent Harney-Lastoka open space property, which is also jointly owned by the 3 agencies. And both properties are currently farmed by the same leasee, whose lease is managed by Boulder County. So while acknowledging the primacy of agriculture uses on the farm, Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville are looking into options to manage the property for multiple uses, including passive recreation, wildlife, habitat conservation, and local agriculture. So in order to balance these goals in a deliberate manner, the management plan establishes a long-term vision for the property and describes management goals and tasks that have been developed based on extensive public outreach and staff expertise. The management plan incorporates detail on the acquisition and history of the property, in addition to the agricultural operation, passive recreation, educational programming, and ecological resources. In particular, this plan highlights the unique opportunity for the property to serve the local community as a much needed destination for ADA accessible trails, which would facilitate opportunities for education and engagement with local agriculture, native wildlife, and the history of the land and our community. I will now pass it off to Ethan, and he'll cover a bit more about the plan development process and whatnot.
Thanks, Jenna. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Ethan Abner, and I'll be discussing the plan development process, which included conducting research to build foundational knowledge, interviewing staff experts at our partner agencies, engaging with members of the community through a survey and focus group, and finally drafting and reviewing the plan. Before we got started with the planning process, it was necessary for our team to build some foundational knowledge. This was primarily done in two ways. Next slide, please. By reviewing past management plans and creating a community profile, first to gain an understanding of how our partners in Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville approach the planning process, we reviewed existing previously adopted land management plans. The first plan that we took a look at was the Harney-Listoka Open Space Plan, which was developed for the property directly north of the Mayhoffer Farm open space, as Jenna noted. This particular plan gave us an idea of where to start and provided some good background about resources in the area due to its proximity to the Mayhoffer Farm. Next, we looked at more recently completed plans like the Walker Ranch update to get a sense of how management plans have evolved over time. Through this review, we were able to incorporate some newer practices that we thought would be beneficial for this particular management plan. For instance, the Walker Ranch update included a table of management goals and strategies that was easy for decision makers and the residents to reference. So we included a similar table at the end of this plan. Next, we also developed a community profile of Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville, which is available in Appendix 7 of the draft plan. The community profile helped us establish baseline demographic trends in Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville. The profile we developed was primarily composed of data from the US Census and Colorado State Demography Office. It allows us to not only provide relevant information about the community, but to try and make more informed decisions about certain aspects of the plan. For instance, the population of residents over the age of 65 is forecasted to double between now and 2050. Additionally, the Latinx community is expected to double over that same time period and ultimately account for 25% of Boulder County's population. So how do we use this data? Well, research into recreation trends, motivations, and preferences suggests that members of these demographic groups may desire different amenities and recreational opportunities than other users. Understanding those future needs can help guide investment and informs recommendations like including benches along segments of the trail, developing trails that are flatter and more easily navigated, or including things like picnic tables that provide opportunities for more social interactions. Next slide, please. After we built a foundational knowledge about the community and process of creating a management plan, we conducted informational interviews with the staff from Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville to better understand the Mayhoffer Farm open space property. We had numerous engagements and discussions with staff who provided expertise in agricultural operations, factors affecting trail development, wildlife and plant ecology, historical and cultural resources, and GIS mapping. The input that we received from staff is present throughout the management plan and informed much of the background information provided in Section 2. Our considerations for potential trail alignments and recommended actions supporting the management direction. Next slide, please. During the early stages of the planning process, our partners also highlighted the importance of engaging with the local community, especially members of traditionally marginalized and underrepresented communities in Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville. Our engagement strategy was a two-pronged approach. First, Kara, Jenna, and I created an intercept survey designed to better understand the preferences of local trail users. The survey collected basic demographic data like race, ethnicity, age, and city of residence. We then also asked respondents their preferences regarding trail usage and conditions and interest in learning about cultural, agricultural, coal mining, and human histories associated with the Mayhoffer Farm open space. In an effort to better engage members of traditionally marginalized and underrepresented communities, we utilized strategies recommended in Boulder County's Cultural Responsiveness and Inclusion Strategic Plan, or the CRISP. The intent of the CRISP, which was approved earlier this year, is to add a cultural responsiveness and inclusion lens to all that Parks and Open Space does and to find better ways to engage and provide services to marginalized and underserved communities. We acknowledged early on, like I said, that this management plan would be an opportunity for to try and incorporate recommendations from the CRISP into the planning process. So we worked with our partners and Thorn Nature Experience to host a dinner for promotores, local leaders in the Latinx community and their families. Through this dinner, we were given a real opportunity to listen and to learn more about the value of local trails, reducing barriers to access, and what trail users like to see and do when they visit trails. We included the insights that we learned from this experience in the management plan, along with the survey, and have worked to incorporate some of the ideas and suggestions where possible. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd just like to discuss the plan drafting and review process. Using the information gained from our initial research, staff interviews, and community engagement, we completed an initial draft of the plan, incorporating the information that we had learned. Once the draft was completed, we provided it to Parks and Open Space staff at Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville. The staff conducted a review of the document and provided our team with critical insights and feedback for consideration, bringing to our attention some issues that we may have overlooked and helped us clarify some elements of the plan. We also posted the plan for public comment and included a comment form on the website in both English and Spanish. Comments received before October 11th were incorporated into the version of the draft that currently exists. Those received between the 11th and now will be incorporated into the draft presented to the Board of County Commissioners and City Councils if we get to move forward. The comment period is going to remain open until November 3rd. We also held a virtual open house for the public on October 5th, where we answered questions from the public and received some feedback on other elements of the plan. A summary of comments received until October 11th was included in the memo packet, and an appendix of comments will be added to the management plan. With that, thanks for your attention. I'll now turn it over to Kara.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us again. My name is Kara Potter, and I will be reviewing key aspects of our draft plan. So this plan has been written to highlight the unique history of the property, past and present uses of the land, as well as current resource inventories. Additionally, this plan aims to develop a clear management vision and direction for the property. As my colleagues mentioned, since acquisition in 2017, the Mayhoffer farm has primarily been used for agriculture. There's an operating plan in place for these agricultural operations. However, our management plan seeks to integrate all multi-use objectives for the property and create a vision for how it could serve the community in new and different ways into the future. Our focus on integrating multiple uses into the management plan of this open space property was based on initial meetings with our partners where they identified the multi-use objectives in Louisville, Lafayette, and Boulder County strategic plans. We have incorporated a detailed appendix of these strategic planning documents that inform the management plan if you're interested to dig into more of that aspect of our process. Considering the three primary multi-use objectives listed here, local agriculture, passive recreation, and wildlife conservation, there are currently no opportunities for passive recreation at the Mayhoffer farm, which limits the community engagement, education, and interpretation opportunities. Constructing a trail has been a primary goal for the Mayhoffer farm since acquisition in 2017. There's a unique opportunity here to create an ADA accessible trail to serve as an alternative connection to the regional Coal Creek Trail. The section of Coal Creek Trail near the Mayhoffer farm is the Aquarius Trailhead, if you're familiar with that area, and it is notoriously steep and not ADA accessible. So the proposed trail alignments have been a focus point of this management plan. Next slide, please. Since April, our team has been meeting with agency staff and community stakeholders, as Ethan mentioned, to develop, among other things, an ADA accessible trail alignment on the Mayhoffer farm property. We have highlighted key goals that we've aimed to balance, which include user experience and immersion, providing opportunities for interpretation, reducing disruption of wildlife habitat, facilitating habitat restoration, and lastly, reducing impacts to existing agricultural operations and nearby property owners. I'm going to talk through each of the options we've considered and then go into more detail about our recommended trail alignment. Next slide. So these first two options, option A and option A alternative, it does include our recommended option, option A, and then a slight adjustment that was considered, which moves part of the trail north of the wetland. That's that kind of darker area on the northeastern parcel. Like I mentioned, I'll go through each trail alignment briefly so you can get a better idea of how they compare and then talk more about this recommended option A after. But a few points to highlight here are that this is the most direct ADA accessible connection to the Coal Creek Trail and balances all the goals I outlined before. This option A does form the base for all other trails considered because it is that direct Coal Creek connection. Option A alternative is a slight adjustment, as I mentioned, which was proposed and considered to avoid certain wet areas of this pasture near the wetland and capped mine. It also gives nearby property owners a greater distance from the trail corridor. However, the placement of this alternative cuts off cattle access to water. And after much consideration and discussion with the agricultural staff, it's not feasible or recommended because it would require cattle to cross the trail at least twice a day from the northmost pasture down to their water source. This consideration reinforced that water access is a primary guiding factor for agriculture at the Mayhoffer farm, and that any land use considerations must be mindful of the limited water access on the property. Next slide. So these are the other two options that were considered: trail option B, which forms a northeast loop, and trail option C, which forms a southwest loop. And option B, as I mentioned, both of these will build off of that initial option A. So in addition to the base trail, option B provides a spur that would connect up to the Harney-Listoka Trail and create that loop. Although we realized through all of our public engagement that folks really do enjoy loop trails, this option is not recommended because a trail would have to be sandwiched between the wastewater treatment plant, an agricultural access road, and an irrigation ditch. And besides the logistical difficulties of balancing those things alongside each other, it does present some safety concerns for both the agricultural leasee and potential recreationalists. On to option C. This option was one of the more favorable options for current ag operations because it doesn't present any direct conflicts. However, there are plans in the Louisville Transportation Master Plan to expand bike lanes on Highway 42 and Empire Road, and this trail may conflict with those plans. And so we have not suggested this route as an option to be considered in this management plan, but we do recommend that it's considered in tandem with the bike lane expansion program or project. Next slide, please. So having seen the options we considered, there was a lot of deliberation back and forth for months now, but we've settled on this option A as being the best option to incorporate into this draft plan. It accomplishes the main goals outlined for a trail at the Mayhoffer farm. It provides an ADA accessible connection to the Coal Creek Trail. It provides immersion through both parcels of the property and creates diverse opportunities for interpretation and education. For example, the trail runs along the side of the capped mine, as I mentioned, that wetland in the northeast parcel, providing opportunities for interpretation of the history, the culture of the area, and native wildlife around the wetland. The trail also runs close to the riparian area, but does maintain a recommended buffer distance from specific wildlife, such as known hawk nesting sites. Additionally, the trail runs through multiple different ag fields, so there would be an opportunity to design interpretation around pasture management and the integration of both forage and pasture systems. There is one water crossing in the southwestern most point of this trail where it joins the existing Coal Creek Trail. This would provide opportunities for some interpretation at that point, but it reduces additional disturbance to the riparian zone. Additionally, this alignment, as it's along the edge of the property, minimizes impact to existing agricultural operations. The southwest portion of the trail does cut through what's currently a cattle pasture next to the creek. However, the fencing along this section of the trail would create two separate pastures, which would provide opportunities for rotating cattle between two pastures and could potentially assist in riparian buffer zone restoration efforts. Lastly, in order to address concerns from property owners in the conservation easements and the restrictive covenant, we have incorporated recommendations in our draft plan for a wide trail corridor, ideally 50 feet or wider, to provide a buffer between the trail and adjacent private property. This wider trail corridor would also provide more space for prairie grass restoration, which was identified as a goal early on within the trail corridor, which is an opportunity to support native wildlife and provide potential interpretation and education. There are some important considerations for this trail option that need to be identified and addressed that will increase costs of construction. Drainage features will need to be incorporated to mitigate the impacts of irrigation tailwater. This would be the case for any trail on the property, considering it is an active agricultural operation. There is irrigation tailwater throughout the property that would need to be dealt with, but specifically in the southwestern parcel, the ag staff identified an area where water tends to collect. There's also a blocked drainage pipe near the capped mine that would require repair. However, this will need to be addressed regardless of a trail. Fencing is also a necessary part of this project, delineating the trail corridor from agricultural operations, keeping both recreationalists and livestock safe. Fencing will be needed on both sides of the trail, especially through that southwestern pasture. And any trail on the farm will also need to be closed intermittently to accommodate for the agricultural operations, like the application of insecticide or weevil-cide. Lastly, the proximity of the trail to nearby property owners will also necessitate clear and regular communication to mitigate any negative impacts and adhere to Boulder County's good neighbor policy. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions about this recommended trail option, and I will pass it off to Jenna to wrap things up.
Yeah, so before wrapping up, I did want to highlight the story map that we created about this property and its management plan. The plan itself is obviously the best way to gain insights about everything that's entailed. However, as a document almost exceeding 100 pages, we did want to create a more public-facing deliverable that summarizes the key points and is a bit easier to understand if you don't know how local government works as well. And the story map provides access in ways that go just beyond recreation and includes interpretive and educational programming. The story map provides a narrative of the management plan and its history while also creating this more interactive user experience. And it can be accessed via phone, tablet, or computer, and is also available in Spanish. So tools like this can allow all different sorts of visitors to scan a QR code and learn more about the property at the touch of their fingertips. And moving forward, we think that additional information or even oral interviews can be added to enhance the overall experience with the story map. So this video may be choppy for you all, but with that being said, we do thank you all for your time. We thought it'd be a cool idea to close out the presentation with some cool drone footage we got of the property. Starting at the northwest parcel and traveling down towards the southeast parcel at the cross section of Empire and 95th Street. As you can see on the right, there's that water treatment facility. And then on the left, the conservation easements or homes are located right there. And yeah, if you would like to access the plan, you can visit the webpage. Otherwise, we do look forward to the Q&A portion of this and hearing what you all have to say. So thank you everybody for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Kara, Ethan, and Jenna, for all your hard work on this. We are going to move on to some clarifying questions from the advisory board and committee members. And then following that, we will move on to public comments. I just want to make a comment real quickly. And then if there's other advisory board people who have questions or clarifying comments they'd like to ask the students, go ahead and raise your hand. I really like how you tried to work on the balance of having a trail corridor along with the agricultural usage, along with the wildlife habitat. And I think you did a nice job balancing all those various different demands on these parcels. In reading through some of your reports, the survey that you did and the outreach that you did with the focus group and some of the other meetings you had and the dinner you had, I think that adds a lot to this. I think that adds a lot to what your final recommendations really are here, taking that community input. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about in the storyboard, you had some comments about, the more holistic historical view of the different people who, utilize this land, including Native Americans prior to European settlement. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about where you see that recommendation going when it comes to this property.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Dave. Or I'll try my best to answer it. In the management plan and in the story map, we've included some of the human history related to the property, as you note. It starts with, indigenous peoples and habitation 11,000 years ago and runs all the way up to the history of coal mining and the Kerr family farm, to the present day agricultural operations that are running there. We think that due to the unique history of the property, going from something that was producing coal, as we all know, that's burned, to become carbon dioxide and has an impact on climate change, to going to something that can be a potential carbon sequester, or something that's a little bit better for the environment, is a good, interesting thing to highlight. And so, considering the themes of just broader human connectedness with the land and trying to incorporate those into educational materials and programming, there's a lot of rich history there. And as Jenna mentioned, there are also those some of those oral interviews, for instance, that had been conducted with folks like Isabella Mayhoffer, who used to live on the farm and was elected at one point in time as the superintendent of schools, I believe, in Louisville in the 1920s or 1930s, which is, just a fascinating bit of history. But giving people that access to this through something like a QR code, or if, one of the recommendations is determine the feasibility of including a 3-season shelter with maybe some picnic tables, which accomplishes multiple recreation objectives, allowing a more interactive experience for folks who can come and visit, especially since there are 4 or 5 schools in the area located within like a mile. And so just trying to focus on those types of things and make it both a passive and active opportunity to learn a little bit more.
Great, thank you. Kara, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just, if I could sense what you were getting at in your question, are you asking about the Indigenous history specifically as well?
Yeah, and just, what are your recommendations in terms of how to tell that larger story of the history, the human history?
Definitely. I think it's, as Ethan mentioned, it's a really fascinating property. And I think we've all had a really fun time getting to dig into it through this project. We deliberated a lot about specifically a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our management plan. And Boulder County is currently in the process of doing a very thoughtful and careful development of not only a detailed but an actionable land acknowledgement. And we felt that we would defer our land acknowledgement section, identifying that there is an important process currently in the works. And we didn't want to rush that process. We didn't want to put in a placeholder. But we did want to acknowledge the history, which I think is why we focus on it in both the plan and the story map. But in terms of integrating into that into the landscape, that's something that I think is part of that larger conversation. And we felt like we didn't have the time in this process to give it the time it deserves. So we kind of deferred to the process that we know is happening at Boulder County.
Good, well, thanks for including that. Looks like I've got Helen and then Charles. Helen, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I wanted to follow up on the discussion about the land acknowledgement and maybe even calling it, a people acknowledgement, because I think we understand the land we're talking about, but it's really a focus on the people. And I'm concerned about in the story map that we don't tell enough of the story about Indigenous people, and that we start in the story map with, in the current version, background on a property, and then the first title is acquisition. And so, I think background on the property starts way before European settlers. And so how can we incorporate the story of how, Native Americans gathered in this, on the Front Range, and how it's a traditional meeting place, how it provided sustainable food sources for Native Americans, and having more of that discussion up front. I think as I was reading throughout the document, in many of the parts, when the discussion is about interpretive resources and signage, I think there's a careful approach to saying, let's address these things, like the indigenous people, and then historical uses and current goals for the property. But I think we haven't been careful enough in this document, and we're not consistent in that. And often the indigenous people are left out of parts of descriptions throughout the document. So I was reading and highlighting, and I'd love to provide some notes and some feedback on areas where I noticed some of those differences. And I'd really like to make the plea for, I understand we want to respect the process for the land acknowledgement statement, but I'd really like to make the case for including a simple statement now, that really we can't wait any longer, that this has been something that needs to be addressed for hundreds of years, that in order, our goal is to do this well, and the process of engaging stakeholders and identifying and delivering on follow-up actions is really important, and it's ongoing and continuous. So it's never going to stop if we do it well. So there's never going to be a point where the history and the present and the future converge, and this is it, and this is all we're going to do. It's work that is always ongoing. So I think this is an opportunity for us to make a very simple statement at this time, to say something like, we acknowledge that this Mayhoffer open space land is the traditional territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute. And then I worked at NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. We have a similar statement. We add another sentence that says, Colorado's Front Range is a contemporary and traditional site of trade and gathering for many indigenous peoples, to make it
Thank you.
Very current and grounded. I don't think we should let the desire for a perfect solution be the enemy of the good, and that we should incorporate a statement now, and then include the language where we talk about we're committed to a process. It's going to be rich, involve stakeholders, and it's going to be ongoing, but we should plant the flag now.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Helen. And I'll just say that I think for now in this portion, we're looking for those clarifying questions rather than the substantive ones. But appreciate that insight. And I think, Dave, did you have something to say?
Yeah, no, that's great, and thanks, Helen, for that comment. Right now is there's discussion. Each board will have its own, and committee will have a time for some discussion. And I love your suggestions, Helen, and thanks for making those. But in terms of just some sort of just factual clarifying questions that anyone might have for our students, Charles, did you want to have a question? And then David, I see your hands up next.
Yeah, I'd like to, it seems like whichever option we go with, A, B, C, or A prime, they're all going to involve a bridge. What I'd like to hear more about, maybe this was mentioned, but more information on the bridge.
So there would, you're right, since that section does cross that portion of Coal Creek in the south part of the property, it would involve a bridge. What we looked at when we were trying to give a general sense of the trail alignment was what the floodplain looks like down in that area using ArcGIS maps from FEMA or Boulder County. I can't remember who they, or some combination thereof. But there is nothing in the plan at this point in time related to the building of the bridge. We assumed that would be something that would come up during the environmental engineering portion of that. And so we didn't include specific information, but we would note that there are some parts of the creek that are a little bit, that are outside of the floodplain, but also a little bit narrower than other portions of the creek that might be a good place to consider building that bridge.
I guess my question specifically was more about, are we looking at a metal truss bridge, or, what exactly engineering wise is in the plan?
There is nothing currently at this moment in time engineering wise in the plan, simply because we don't have the expertise in environmental engineering to make those recommendations in an informed way.
Mm-hmm.
I think these first two questions have just brought to my attention that we are neither cultural historians nor environmental engineers. So.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like that will be something that will be further down the line. But yeah, good point, Charles, that there will be a creek crossing at some point, and we'll have to consider that as the plan moves ahead. David, and then Tony. David, do you have a question for the students?
Yeah, I have a couple things I'll rattle off, and then we can kind of, steer the conversation as appropriate. One thing is in the Open Space Advisory Board meeting with Louisville a couple months ago, we had brought up the potential use of some of the creek, riparian area as nature play. And that was not mentioned. So I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that was dismissed because of environmental concerns. So that would be a clarifying question. Another thing is I didn't really see much in the way of wildlife analysis. So it seems like the trail corridors are primarily related to where things are going to play nice with agriculture, but there wasn't necessarily anything there about, known coyote dens, or I've actually seen a bobcat down right at the base of the Aquarius trailhead before. So I know there's some there. So if you could comment on that. And then my last thing is the timeline for the trail development. There was nothing there to say this is the 5-year plan or this is the 20-year plan, but you also said that this is a good baseline if we go with option A for potential future trail expansion. I think I know what you're getting at because you're kind of shoehorning in the kind of the guidelines, the trail corridors with what might be happening with the Highway 42 project. But maybe let me know whether what is being proposed is kind of the be all end all, or it's just kind of in the initial phase. That's it.
Yeah, so David, I tried my best to capture those. Just correct me if I get them wrong. But as far as the creek goes in nature play, one of the things that we recognize is that the land management plan is kind of a snapshot at this moment in time that provides direction for future action. And so understanding that things may change, the agricultural operations that exist on the property may change, opportunities may become available to include things like nature play. At this point in time, we didn't recommend that. And there could be concerns with the environmental quality of the water in Coal Creek, or it could just be if there are cattle accessing the creek, because that is the only point of water access on that part of the property right now. You just don't want those two things to mix. What we do note in the land management plan is that one of the issues that's going to have to be resolved is water access for the property, even if that's off property water. And so that's one of the things that we recommend resolving first. Two, as far as wildlife goes, we did take into consideration some of the wildlife. The coyote dens is not something that we discussed. But we did talk with the wildlife folks about wildlife on the property, and the list of potential wildlife is included as an appendix. And also that note that there is a nest in that area that is intermittently used by raptors, was something that we were mindful of when trying to determine, placement for the trail, and also keeping the trail away from the creek, so that it would have less of an impact on that riparian habitat. But that's certainly something we can look at. And then third, the timeline for trail development. We've tried our best in the management direction table at the end of the document to try and provide some time estimates of when things should get done. They're not always going to be in the frame of, have this done in 1 to 3 years, but we've tried to prioritize things so that they can be pursued in a manner that is, at least in our minds at this point in time, logical. So for instance, resolving that water issue, right? If you do resolve that water issue on the property, well, then that may change some of the things that you can consider moving forward. And so, resolving that and then taking a look at things like trails, education, and interpretation. Generally, I think we don't have a timeline number in there, but if that's something that's beneficial to include, it's certainly something we can consider. Did I answer all your questions, David? I'm sorry.
You did. Yeah, good job. Thanks.
I'll just add on to what Ethan said. I think he covered it well, but I'll just reinforce that we did meet with the wildlife staff from Boulder County and Louisville. I believe we met with trails folks from Lafayette, but we did discuss the wildlife in that area. And we were mindful of everything they told us about. And the main thing that required a buffer distance was that hawk nesting site, as Ethan mentioned. And to the last point about timing, I think something that's been brought to our attention multiple times is, just the reality of how these projects work. I was out there gazing longingly, being like, oh, it's going to be so cool to potentially see a trail here in 1 to 3 years that we designed. And Tina was like, I don't think that's a realistic timeline, which is totally fine. And I think that's part of our learning process here. But as Ethan mentioned, we've identified things that are high priority, medium priority, and low priority. And it's all about what the agencies are doing, where the funding's at. And, those kinds of things are going to determine the start date of the actual construction.
Great, thanks. Good questions, David, and thanks for answering those. Looks like we have Tony and then Jen. Tony, clarifying questions for our students.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Tony Lewis with Boulder County POSAC. Ethan, Kara, Jenna, nice job on the plan. It's a lot of work, and it shows that you guys put a lot of time and energy into it. So thank you. And I'm just curious, and no plan can cover everything, right? Like, as you start into this, you realize there's only so much depth you can get into and so many specifics. So I appreciate where you got to, and I think it's a good place. But I'm curious if you could talk just a little bit about the wetlands on the site and the riparian areas. And I'm just curious if you looked at how to maintain or protect either of those, especially if there's cattle operations going on.
I can hop in on that one and then feel free to add, Jen and Ethan. So the wetland is actually a product of the capped mine. The Rex number 2 mine is a capped mine in the northeast parcel of the property. And it's currently, it's a flooded mine, and there's a drainage pipe that's currently blocked, which is what has created the wetland in a sense. It would be a wet area no matter what, but there's a pipe that is in the works of being repaired. So it would not be as marshy of an area as it is now. But it does still provide the water access for the cattle, which is one of the key considerations for the trail alignment. And then the riparian area is currently in a, the cattle pasture is down in that area, like you mentioned. And I mentioned this briefly in our presentation, but water access is a big limiting factor on this property. And due to the current water rights, those are the only water access points for livestock. So even if, the leasing and ag staff wanted to have a different watering source, those are the only ones that are available. And so with the riparian area, especially, we were interested in the trail corridor providing that division of the pasture into 2 pastures. So you could rotate and potentially do some riparian zone restoration by keeping the cattle away from the creek. But again, that's about as far as we got. And then, as we've mentioned, trying to keep the trail corridor away from the creek as much as possible.
Great, thank you.
And Tony, if I can just add one thing to that real quick.
Yeah.
There is an existing agricultural operating plan that Kara mentioned for the property. And one of the things covered in that plan briefly is just trying to improve the riparian area.
Mm-hmm.
There are a bunch of things that need to be weighed and balanced against one another. And so one of the things that we added in this most recent draft of the plan was creating a restoration plan for the riparian area for wildlife habitat in tandem, just so that there is some expertise there in forming that, and then those concerns weighed and considered.
That's great. Thanks, Ethan.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Jen from POSAC, you have a question?
I do, thank you. Sorry, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see me. I had to move outside. I have a question regarding sort of consultation with respect to the trail design. Boulder County has a really solid trail staff, and they're really, really cognizant of the different types of needs for the different soil in different areas, user conflict, view sight lines, and all of this. So you'd mentioned one of the other towns trails people, but I was just wondering how much consulting you did with other trail builders and designers.
Yeah, so early on in the process, I can't remember the exact month, it's all kind of running together. But we met with some of the folks from Boulder County and Louisville and Lafayette on trails to just discuss kind of the general considerations that might be used for a trail like this. We talked about, how you might compensate for a wetter area of the property, what kind of trail you might be. Is it going to be something like crusher fine, or is it going to be something like concrete? Is that something that impacts user experience? Because anecdotally, one of the things we heard when we were doing our survey was that people like crusher fine. They also like loops, but we tried to balance between not getting so far ahead of ourselves into the trail design, but having an understanding of what factors might be in play and what might influence cost, what might influence those sorts of things as we moved forward. It was our understanding that typically those are addressed at a later date. And so we did try and remain cognizant of those particular things as we laid out the routes. But yeah, we did have a couple of discussions with the trail folks at all of the agencies.
And Andy Tyler in particular gave us feedback on our draft plan. So he's looked over it and he might be shaking his head, but he's not telling us.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Thanks, Jen. And it looks like, Helen, do you have another question? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question about the trail use regulations. Where I know, because we've got the three-way partnership and talking about who's in charge of regulations and enforcement at different points along the trail. And if you all have a sense of, is there a lot of overlap between those regulations, or are there going to be challenges with, like typically in Louisville, we don't have trails open or properties open till 10 o'clock at night. Just wondering, like, do you have any recommendations about strategies for sort of how to manage that, or is like a next phase maybe to do a reconciliation of those regulations? Just wondering if you had some thoughts about how to approach that.
Yeah, I would. Thanks for the question, Helen. I'm going to try and do my best to recall this from memory, but because there are overlapping jurisdictions between Boulder County, Louisville, and Lafayette, we did have a pretty in-depth discussion about what trail regulations should look like. And we included some of the main ones regarding dogs being on leashes, no horses on the trail, which also has those ecological benefits of not spreading seeds for weeds. And then, recognizing that the trail would be in close proximity to neighboring properties, closing the trail between, nighttime hours so that there's less of a concern on that part, hopefully. But I think that Louisville, Lafayette, and Boulder have language that they've been working on or are in the process of working on regarding these kind of jointly shared properties that does provide that guidance, in addition to the guidance that's provided by the Boulder County Parks and Open Spaces general regulations, irregardless. And so we tried to include some of that in there. And then if there is additional conversations on the back end on who does what, then that would happen between Louisville, Lafayette, and Boulder County.
Thank you.
And I think we actually did have a conversation with our partners about the hours. That was something you raised. And I think we ended up basing the hours that are currently included in the plan off of the Coal Creek Trail, because this would be a spur off the Coal Creek Trail. But that's definitely something we can look back at as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Helen. Are there other clarifying questions for our wonderful master's students from any of the committee or board members? We'll have time to do our discussions later. So
I saw a quick question in the chat from Deb Fahey, I believe. Yeah, and she was just asking about ADA access on the trails.
Sure.
And I can just go ahead and talk to that real quick. That is a guiding goal for this trail. We're hoping that we could provide an ADA accessible alternative to the current route of the Coal Creek Trail. The Mayhoffer farm is pretty flat. There'd be one area down by the creek where we'd have to maybe do some switchbacks, but that's definitely the goal for this trail.
Yeah, great. So if there are no more clarifying questions from the board and committee members, I think we're moving on. Tina, correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to move on to public comment. And I think, Nick, you're going to try to call on the members of the public who've indicated that they'd like to speak. And we'll have a 3-minute limit on the public comment. But Nick, can you get us going on the public comment?
Yes, absolutely. Any of the attendees, if you would like to make a public comment, please use the raise your hand feature, and that way I can allow you to speak and you can make your comments.
This is Trace Baker. I'm going to be keeping the timer. We don't have an on-screen timer, so I will let you know at the when you have 1 minute left, and then if you do run out your time, I'll let you know about that too.
Thanks, Trace.
And if I could just ask a clarifying question, because I do see some questions coming in through the chat. Would you like us to just address those once we've moved through other attendees raising hands to ask questions, or how would you like us to handle that?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, Ethan. I'm not seeing any raised hands right now, so could you address the question that was asked by Maya, I believe?
Yeah, so Mr. Dancy is one of the adjacent property owners, as he notes in the comments section. We did have an opportunity to meet with him and discuss some of the concerns and some of the things that he liked about the management plan. One of the concerns that came up with it was the historic water rights, and recognizing broadly that water has been a challenge at this property, and that there are certain ways that fields are irrigated and there are certain accesses to water. We were hoping that, in accordance with Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville's good neighbor policies, that consistent communication would be maintained so that those issues can be resolved. We discussed some potential ways to mitigate those water access issues, but we feel if the agricultural specialists, the water rights folks at the county, and Lafayette and Louisville, or whoever needs to be there, can get together and discuss those concerns, then a good, well thought out resolution can be reached, because the last thing we want to do is impact anybody's water rights.
Yeah, I'll just add. Oh,
nope, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I did have a follow-up meeting with some of the ag staff after we'd met Maya, and I think there may be, water rights are a very confusing thing. But I feel like we identified there may be some miscommunication about where water's flowing. And ideally, the water for the restrictive covenant property would not have to flow through open space property to get to the water rights holders property. So again, as Ethan mentioned, I think that that's a place for increased communication and understanding.
I also see that there's a question about prairie dog colony on the southwest corridor of the property. I would just note, since the property is largely agriculture, and the recommendation in the land management plan is to manage in accordance with the Mayhoffer Farm IGA, which everyone, all of the agencies were a partner to, as well as Boulder County's prairie dog policy. I believe agricultural lands are designated as no prairie dog zones, and so that would be managed in accordance with that policy.
Thanks for answering that question, Ethan.
And I'm not seeing any hands raised, so we'll last call for any members of the public to make public comment. Please use raise your hand.
I'm not actually seeing the raise hand icon on my screen here.
For the attendees, they have an option to raise their hand. Okay.
Looks like there's a question about an invasive plants and management alternatives for the agricultural plans.
Yeah, one of the sections in the plan, is related to weed management, because we do know that there are a variety of weeds present on the property and in the surrounding area. And so we've tried to include some of that in there. There's also certain weed management activities that take place as part of the agricultural operating plan, which is laid out in that. But definitely trying to continue with the work that Boulder County, Lafayette, and Louisville are doing respectively to kind of combat weed infestations is certainly something that we tried to highlight in the plan. And then as far as how far is the proposed shade structure from parking or road access, I believe the closest parking access would be either the Aquarius Trailhead or the street parking. Trying to do this from memory, there are 3 access points of varying differences. There's street parking along that area of the Coal Creek Trail that enters from the northeast. I believe it's Centaurus Street or Centaurus. I might be wrong there. And then there's also the Aquarius Trailhead, and then the Louisville Sports Complex area. I don't know off the top of my head the exact distances, but I believe that all of them are somewhere between a half a mile to a mile and a half, depending on where you enter from.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. And Josh Kuhn, it looks like you have a question.
I do. Thanks, Dave. So that question about access makes me think about accessibility, ADA accessibility to the property. So how does that work? I mean, is there, if you park a mile, half a mile away, is that ADA accessible to the property?
I think it would really depend, because one of the things that we tried, as Kara noted, was to create that ADA accessible trail for the Coal Loop or the Coal Creek Trail, under the assumption that folks who would need ADA accessibility were already using the Coal Creek Trail, and would be able to bypass the Aquarius Trailhead that way. But I would imagine that it could be somewhat difficult for some folks if they have to park from half a mile away or a mile and a half away to access that portion of the trail, which is one of the reasons that we included the recommendation that along with ADA accessibility and an aging population that might have a different desire or need for amenities, to try and include benches along the trail so that people can take a break as they're making their way to wherever they're going. I know that's not a perfect answer to your question, but I hope that provides some insight.
I will just add on something that was appealing about creating an ADA accessible trail in this location specifically is the proximity to the Coal Creek Trail and the Harney-Wostoka Trail, which connect to neighborhoods that are right there that have sidewalks. So one of the things that we talked about with the promotores was the desire to be able to access a trail without having to drive somewhere. So being able to walk from their neighborhood out to the trail and back. And so just from my perspective, if I was going to go walk this trail, I would probably park somewhere near or around the neighborhoods, which may present some issues if it's a wildly popular trail all of a sudden. But from my experience walking from the neighborhoods to the property, it's pretty flat.
Just to clarify where that is for you all, it's Centaur Village Drive that goes past Ryan Elementary School, and it ends at Aaron Way, and it's the Adler Fingru jointly owned properties between all 3 agencies. You enter the area, and it's about a quarter mile or less to where the proposed shelter and public engagement area would be. So just to clarify that, so you know exactly where we're talking.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rob. Josh, did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you. And maybe it's outside of the scope of this management plan, but something for all of us to consider is just creating greater accessibility to this property if the opportunity were to arise through various management plans or parking, things like that.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to what Rob said real quick, because Rob knows the area better than I do. I was off in my mental map of where I thought I was, and it is a quarter mile from that Centaur Drive to where the proposed amenity shelter would be.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So unless there's any other public comment, which it sounds like we don't have any, we'll move on to the discussion and deliberation. So each of the three entities will have their own discussion with each other about the management plan. And then after each board and committee has their own discussion, then each board and committee will then make their own recommendation about how they want to proceed. So we will start with the Boulder County group, Boulder County Advisory Committee, and you all can have some discussion time about your thoughts and how you want to proceed, but don't make any recommendations. Stop short of making a recommendation.
Thank you, Dave. Trace Baker, Boulder County, POSAC. POSAC members, do we have any discussion? Please raise your hands. Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Trace. Tony Lewis, POSAC. I'm just trying to figure out, and maybe Dave or you can give me a little guidance on who we're making a recommendation to and at what depth or to what degree. That would help me a bunch.
Trace, would you like me to jump in here with a quick clarification?
Go ahead, Tina.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to jump in on you. For the benefit of everybody, I just a tiny bit of clarification on the procedural aspects going forward here with the three different advisory committees. I think each of you are going to just follow your normal procedure. For POSAC, that means deliberation and getting a motion on the table, but we'll hold off on the vote until all three committees have completed their own deliberation, and then that way each board benefits from hearing the other two boards, and then once the three boards have each done their deliberations, then we'll go back and take the vote. The vote for the Parks and Open Space Advisory Committee will be to the Board of County Commissioners, and the desired outcome is that you vote to forward a recommendation to approve to your own decision-making body. So for Boulder County, that would be the Board of County Commissioners, and for the two cities, that would be your respective city councils.
Tina, can I ask you a question about that then? If we were to make a recommendation to approve the management plan as written, where do the details get fleshed out about the plan, right? These guys did a great job taking the plan to a place where we have a pretty good understanding of the major strategies, if you will. But even things like the questions of how long will it take to build the trail, or, what kind of bridge? I mean, at what level of detail do we want to say we approve this plan and staff are going to flesh this out?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Tony. It's a great question. So it's pretty normal in a management plan that all those design details are not fleshed out, and that would normally happen. So speaking for Boulder County, the way it happens is that we get it on our capital improvements project list, and we start figuring out timing, and then we start fleshing out the design to understand what the cost will be so that we can get the funding allocated. Because all of these improvements will be done jointly and the cost will be shared jointly, we'll be working with our partner agencies to do that in concert. So, for example, right now the 104th Street Trail at Rock Creek Farm, very somewhat similar process. It's a joint project between the three agencies, a very expensive one, and it's been in the planning stages for probably many years, I'll say. It's been on the radar for over 10 years. So these things, you know, because they can be expensive and because it's sometimes complicated, I'm not saying that this one is as complicated as 104th Street. 104th Street, it's got a lot of engineering to deal with. This one is probably not quite as complicated. So, but it does have to get, you know, it has to get on the priority list, and then it has to, you know, come up for funding allocation. And in the case of Boulder County, at least, we've got a lot more wishes and desires than we have a budget for. So it can take a few years to work its way up to the priority.
Thank you, Tina. And for POSAC members, when it comes time to making a motion, the packet that Renata sent out to us does include recommended or rather suggested motion language. You don't have to speak those words, but that is a place to start. Is there any more discussion from Boulder County? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so if we're done with our deliberations, we can pass it back to Dave. Last call. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Trace. So next up will be the Lafayette Advisory Committee. So we have a few of our members here, and any discussion or deliberation or comments we want to make, like we would normally do in one of our LOSAC meetings. Any comments from any of our members? Let's see, I got Lynn with her hand up on Zoom and Allison with her hand up in real life. So let's go with Lynn first and then Allison. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I do think I'm very pleased with the plan and think it's laid the groundwork, as this level of plan does, for moving forward for both trail concepts, you know, making this area accessible to the community in many ways, but also planning for restoration and wildlife habitat improvements in the future, and shifts in agriculture and water use potentially in the future. And I would just urge all of us to continue to think about that, the long range view, and also how this property fits in the larger landscape in terms of, and I think that the plan developers have done a good job with this, but how it fits in the larger landscape in terms of wildlife habitat and corridors, and in terms of corridors and bird habitat, et cetera. So just keeping all that in mind as we move forward over time, using this excellent plan as a launch.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Lynn. Allison and then Josh. Allison, your comments or thoughts?
I guess I'm still just a little confused about the whole wetland area and the cattle usage. I understand that I think I understand that there's currently an agricultural plan, and we can't change that right now. I certainly would like to see a way to keep cattle out of wetlands and out of the creek in the future. And I understand they need to drink. So I'm not trying to imply that it's an easy solution, but I would hope that would be a goal for the future, because if we're worrying about wildlife and environment and all that stuff, cattle, you know, in the water is definitely not a good thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, let's go to Josh, and then maybe Ethan, you can address some of those comments, but let's go to Josh with your comments.
Great, thanks. So I think the management plan is fantastic, and I don't have any feedback or suggestions on like the environmental aspects, but I'm a little hung up on the access and the question I asked earlier. And I'm way out of my area of expertise, but I'm just wondering if any kind of analysis was done about where, like if Centaur Village and Centaur Drive is ideally where we're hoping people will park to use this ADA compliant trail, is that adequate? I mean, I don't know if you consulted with any organizations that might provide guidance or anything like that. I just want to ensure we're not creating this fantastic ADA accessible trail, but it's like in an island, you know what I mean? That it's just challenging to access. And so I'm just a little hung up on that, but I think you guys did a fantastic job, and just would be interested in learning more about that issue.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Ethan, did you want to address the cattle question from Allison, and any thoughts you guys have on that one, or Kara or Jenna?
Yeah, and I appreciate all the questions and the kind words. Really, this was a complex process, and it is a challenging thing to do. So we definitely appreciate that. Regarding the cattle, I think one of the things that we tried to balance was, part of the reason for acquiring the property was to preserve the rural buffer space between Lafayette and Louisville that are, continuing to grow, and recognizing again that this is kind of a snapshot in time and things may change over time. Providing this direction now and recognizing that there are, in my mind, more flexible plans such as the agricultural operating plan that can evolve over time as conditions change. Is an important way to maybe address some of those things. Again, one of the things that we try and note in the plan is that one of the reasons that the cattle have to have access to the areas of water that they have to have access to is because there's no agreement for off-property water and where that water comes from. And so if that can be reviewed and somewhat resolved, then that might change other things moving forward. And so that's why we've put it as one of the more high priority items to address. And then regarding the ADA accessibility, Josh, you brought up a point that I don't know that I considered, but just parking to use that segment of the trail. Like Rob said, it would be in that neighborhood parking, and that is a quarter mile away. That's probably your best entrance point. I'm going to have to, I don't know the grade of Aquarius coming down the other end, but I do know that it goes down that hill and crosses that road, so it might not be the best parking option. Coming from Louisville, from the sports complex is another good parking option, though it's a little bit longer than the neighborhood. We did not conduct an analysis to determine what that parking would look like and how that access would occur, but we did try to balance a couple of things together in creating that stretch of the regional trail that would be ADA accessible, so you don't have to get to Aquarius and then turn around because you can't really go any further if you're coming from a farther distance. And whether that's coming with an ambulatory difficulty, or coming in a wheelchair, or coming on an e-bike because it's just easier for you to ride. Those are things that we tried to consider as we move forward on this. But as far as any specific analysis, no, none were conducted.
Yeah, and I'll just add to both those points. I think Ethan mentioned this, but we had included in the plan a recommendation for a restoration plan along the riparian corridor. And we recommend that in tandem with an update of the agricultural management plan. And as Ethan highlighted, those are somewhat more flexible documents that would be able to evolve over time. In terms of the ADA accessibility, I'll just echo Ethan and say that I appreciate you bringing up this point, and it seems kind of silly that we didn't think of it sooner. But as he mentioned, there is a really nice big parking lot by the sports complex. And when we did a site visit, we walked from the sports complex down the Harney-Listoka Trail to where the Mayhoffer farm trail would join. And all of that is relatively flat. So I think, that's something that, again, we're in a compressed timeline, which is somewhat of a bummer, but we could definitely add in an analysis to be conducted. That'd be cool.
If I could just real quickly respond. I mean, I think somebody mentioned earlier that no plan is going to be all encompassing of everything. And I didn't think about this until the conversation tonight, and just wondering if there's an opportunity for somebody who has expertise to get involved at some point to help ensure that we're getting it right. Because I think you've done a fantastic job. Let's just make sure with the follow through, we're getting it totally right.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And yeah, my comments, I made some of them before. This is a great management plan, and thank you so much to Kara and Ethan and Jenna for all your work on it. Like I said, I thought some of the research and surveys and outreach and public input is really valuable for this kind of a management plan. And the kind of overall framework and your recommended trail and your recommended use of agriculture and some of the overall big picture of the plan is I support it. Some of these details that we're asking about can be filled in later or considered to improve the plan. But I think conceptually and as a framework and as a kind of overall management plan, I like it and I support it. So any other discussion from Lafayette Open Space? No? Okay. Terrific. So we'll pass it over to Louisville Advisory Board for you all to do some deliberations.
All right, thanks, Dave. In the meantime, we started out with 5 members. I see we now have Jessamine Fitzpatrick, who has also joined us, if the records need to show that. What do you think, guys? Who'd like to speak up on this issue? Peter.
Okay, I basically find that the management plan is consistent with the Louisville Open Space Charter, the ordinance, and existing IGAs between the 3 parties. Does a good job. I'm prepared to support it as submitted.
All right, Helen, I saw your hand go up.
I insert here my speech about the land and people acknowledgement. I think that is significant work that we still need to do. I want to honor in this, be sure that in this process, we have an open comment period until I think you said November 3rd. So I know that this vote is approving or recommending a plan that is still in process and that will still be edited. To have my full support, I think we need to do more work on the land and person acknowledgement and the work on making sure that the interpretive sections always include a component for Native peoples. I think this is a really terrific framework, and I can appreciate how much work was done on it. And I really appreciate your work, Kara, Ethan, and Jenna. I know that left to us, it would have been a much longer process. I think it would have been less, it would have been challenging to get as much feedback. It was wonderful what you've done to engage people throughout this process. And so I really want to be sure that that spirit and that intention is fully honored. So if perhaps you could speak to my concerns and my advocacy for the land and people acknowledgement, and also maybe some sort of reconciliation with the education and interpretive sections. And I also raise my hand if you would like fresh eyes or notes on this. I would be very happy to provide comments and feedbacks and go through the document. And if that would be helpful, I absolutely raise my hand.
Yes, ma'am. I really do appreciate those comments. Starting from, I'm going to try and do my best to remember what you raised. I tried to jot it down earlier, so forgive me if I leave anything out, but just starting with the most recent one, if there is a way that is in accordance with how you all would generally make those recommendations to us, that's, I don't know what the legal term for it is, but I'm aware that, we have to be careful about how we communicate with folks, and we have to communicate through staff because there are sunshine laws. And so if there is a way that there's a process that's normally given to folks who are drafting and presenting land management plans, then absolutely, I think we would 100% value anybody's feedback, your feedback, especially. one of the things that you had mentioned about the ArcGIS story map and that we kind of wrestled with was, how do we tell the story? Like, what should we tell the story chronologically starting from 11,000 years ago, or should we provide the high level beginning highlights of the property and the acquisition, and then include the section on human history, which does in the story map begin at the 11,000 years ago point and then walk its way up to the most recent. If we didn't get it 100% right, I think one of the beautiful things about a story map is that it's a living document. It can be updated. It can provide a template for whatever educational material people want to associate with the property moving forward. And it's something that can be changed over time to reflect past and current conditions. If we're celebrating, I think America celebrated its first Indigenous Peoples Day. If that's something we're celebrating, well, you can make an ArcGIS story map about that, and you can tie it to the property if that's something people choose to do in the future. So there's a lot of value there. And then another point that you had raised regarding the land acknowledgement, this is something that we wrestled with, truthfully, because we heard from different folks with different perspectives about including a land acknowledgement statement, and understanding that in drafting a land acknowledgement statement, I think what we had determined that it should be something that's both meaningful and actionable. And in order to do that, and that the process of coming up with a land acknowledgement statement or a people acknowledgement statement is just important as the statement that you make. And so trying to be cognizant of that and making sure that that gets done the right way. We tried to include that opening paragraph saying that, look, this is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And I'm not certain that we would be able to draft something that's personally meaningful or actionable to us or to the Boulder County, to Lafayette, to Louisville in the amount of time that we had. And so if there is a way moving forward, perhaps that's something that we can discuss, because we agree that it is something that is incredibly important. We were just trying to be mindful of doing it the right way, because, setting the marker, I agree, is great. And perfect should not be the enemy of good. And having worked in the federal government, trust me, I totally believe that statement. And so, perhaps there is something that we can do moving forward, but we just wanted to be responsible about it.
Yeah, I think the action is making that simple acknowledgement, and then there's great depth to the other parts of it, and we're looking for something as simple as that, a statement on a sign, with the QR code, with the audio cueing, where we can really tell the story, where we can get to the plan about the actions, where we can say, hey, here's the process that's going to continue, and you can be part of it. But I think we're missing the boat when we don't take the action now. And so, not that it's actionable in the future, but making the action now with that simple statement that can be on our signs, our wayfinding, and not just in a sense maybe buried and interpretive, but really become part of how we introduce and welcome people to this property. And so I think that simple statement, even at this point, saying it in this document and being poised to do it on our wayfinding and our signs, I think this is a critical time for us.
Certainly. And I really respect that point of view. And I think maybe it's something we can look at. One of the things that you did say that reminded me of something that I also wanted to just cover is some of the public comments that we had got made note that, we may have not included the complete history. And so in recognizing that, it's important to have educational and interpretive programming, but it's also important to have the right educational and interpretive programming. We altered the management direction section to include a statement saying that, interpretive and educational programming should be culturally relevant and historically accurate. And so just putting that in there to highlight all of the property's history moving forward, something that we got feedback on and something that we tried to address.
Yeah, and I will just echo Ethan and say that we, within the team, within our partners, we talked about this quite a bit, because in our initial draft, we did have a land acknowledgement statement. And then we were made aware of the process that's happening in Boulder County. And so, like Ethan said, we were trying to be responsible and respect that process. And so we ended up inserting the placeholder instead. And then we thought about including the placeholder as well as a statement, acknowledging that this isn't perfect, we're working on it, but this is what we want to include because we want to include something. And there was different feelings about that within the group. And I think Rob Burdine made the comment that it might not be great to say, this isn't good, but here it is anyways. So I think that's something that we wrestled with a bit. But we do have a statement. And I think, as Ethan mentioned, we just didn't feel that we had the expertise or depth of engagement with the subject to make something. But I definitely appreciate your perspective, Helen. And I think that's definitely an ongoing conversation.
Okay, do we have any additional comments from the Louisville crowd?
Yeah, I did real quick. So I was looking at the trail use regulations section, and I must admit, I just was diving into some of the details of the management plan. The part in there, it actually reads a little bit poorly in some ways. It talks about non-motorized bikes, and then it says that e-bikes are allowed. In the interest of standardizing against what the county regulations are, I would propose that we match in general what the county does for regional trails and or their open space properties. And I also do not like non-enforceable regulations like 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. Just open at 24 hours. We're not dealing with residential areas, within, 100 feet or anything like that. So I would scratch the hours. And then I would actually standardize on only allowing class 1 and class 2 e-bikes. Let's just keep things simple. If somebody goes from the Coal Creek Trail, which has one set of regulations, and veers off on this other trail, I want to make sure that there's a consistent guideline, consistent body of rules that they have to follow. So I think that is one thing that we could potentially clean up. Really just a couple sentences there, depending on what the interest is. And then the other thing that I wanted to put out there is, I think UCU students have done a bang up job. The only thing that concerns me is you're graduating in 2 months, and ownership of this document could be a little bit ill-defined. So I think we probably should discuss a formal handoff. What is that going to look like? Who's going to be the main driver? So that's all I have.
All right. Anybody else before I have my say? Peter?
Go ahead.
Peter, do you want to say something, or you're saying I should go?
Well, yeah, you go ahead, because we've all had at least one round.
I think, as everybody else has said, I think this is great. I can't wait to get out there and use it, hopefully, in the next decade. I think addressing some of the comments earlier on accessibility, ADA, accessibility, great. Really, I think we need to look at this trail in the larger system. This is not, a brand new trail through a brand new area. It is sort of an alternate route connecting, around the hill on the Coal Creek Trail. So I don't think it's going to see a dramatic increase in use. I think the fact that it has a loop in it is going to be great. I think we're going to see a lot of commuter traffic, people headed east-west along the Coal Creek Trail who decide to not go up the hill, which would be great. So I'm really curious to see where this actually ends up in 10 years' time. Yeah, I guess that's all I had to say. Peter, I know you want to say something.
Okay, so procedurally, Helen brings up a point that is obviously very important to her, but I think procedurally we need to recognize that, first of all, none of the votes and recommendations that we make tonight are final or binding on our jurisdictions. Our boards, respective elected officials will hold their own meetings, hearings. They'll take public comment. The record for this hearing remains open. So Helen, by all means, go ahead and suggest a language. That'll all be part of the record. And the boards, when they come up to have their meetings. They'll incorporate the record of this hearing, the record before them, and they make the final decision. But for purposes of the big picture management plan, this has it. And as I said before, I'm ready to move for approval as submitted. And I think a lot of the comments made are geared towards operational level details, which will be handled by the staffs. There's a lot of work in managing these properties, and this management plan simply provides a framework for how the operational decisions will be made. And for purposes of meeting that threshold, this nails it.
I would like to ask the question about that Ethan and I were sort of talking about, of what's the process for how we can provide some of that written feedback? Is it just through the public channels for comment, or is there a way to create a document from our open space board and say, hey, here are our notes we'd like you to consider, and make it sort of easier for you to access
well, this meeting is being recorded, so we have a record of everything that you said.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're going to have another board meeting
Charles,
before
going through the document and making notes on it, and that kind of notation.
Yeah, if you want to do that, go ahead, and that becomes a part of this record. And because I don't think we're going to have another board meeting of Louisville Open Space Board before decisions need to be made by our city council. So I think this is our night for formal action. And if you or anyone else wants to add to the record, I think they said the record's going to be open until November 3rd.
I guess I'd like to be on record making a motion to approve this plan with the addition of the version that Kara talked about, of including the land acknowledgement statement, and doing both, including the land acknowledgement statement and the description of the commitment to the process.
Okay, and frankly, I think that is already included in the text of the document itself, so I can support that. And for purposes of our board, I'll second the motion.
Okay. It sounds like Louisville is done. Dave, do you want to? How are we going to proceed from here?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. And Tina, do you have any comments following up all the deliberations before we move on?
Yeah, thank you for that. I have maybe just one comment that might address a little bit of the discussion that's happened here in terms of what happens next. So thank you all very much for your comments. The student team, as well as the staff, will take those things into consideration and incorporate some of that into the management plan very directly. We'll also, in the memo to the decision bodies, summarize your input so that each decision body has a very quick way of seeing what the comments were. And so your comments are welcome. And as has been discussed, if you want to give specific direction regarding the text, I think the best way to do that is through the public link, the comments in the public link. And that way it's all transparent and visible to everybody else. And that's the way we want to keep it to be transparent. So at this point, procedurally, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jessamine. I'm on the Louisville Open Space Advisory Board, and I had my hand raised, but I think Charles didn't see. So could I just add one more? That's okay. Could I just add one more comment before we proceed? Which is that I would like the staff, well, first, thank you very much to Jenna, Kara, and Ethan. Terrific job. I know this is a really complicated project. I thought you guys did a wonderful job on so many respects. So thank you very much for your contribution to our communities. I would like the students and staff, as you're considering changes and adjustments, to take into account, or at least perhaps revisit the ranking of maintenance of vegetative resources as described on page 45 of the draft management plan. Right now, everything in that category is a medium. And I know for our staff in particular, they spend a lot of time on weed management control and other stewardship of vegetation, and particularly in the riparian area that's outside of the leased area. Consider making that a higher priority, because it's something that requires resources, financial and staff time, and I think should be prioritized. So thanks again for your help and for consideration of that possible adjustment. And thanks, Tina, for letting me interrupt you.
So again, Tina, it sounds like some of these specific suggestions to be included in the plan can be made through the public input channels, and the objective here is to give a higher level sort of recommendation to our legislative bodies that we are each recommending to.
Yes, and if you want to condition your recommendation on including something, you're welcome to do that in your motion. You know, that will either vote up or down according to how everyone feels about it. So
yeah, okay.
That's for you to kind of wrestle with.
Okay, great. So we have, well, let's go to the Boulder County POSAC for your recommendation and possibly a motion that you would like to make to the Boulder County commissioners.
Yes, Trace Baker, Boulder County Parks and Open Space Advisory Committee. Before opening up for further discussion and motions, would like to thank Ethan and Jenna and Kara for an excellent plan and an excellent presentation of that plan. For Boulder County, do we have a motion concerning this plan?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion, Trace. This is Tony Lewis. I move to recommend that the Board of Commissioners approve the Mayhoffer Farm Management Plan project as described and presented by the CU MENV student team.
And Open Chain second.
Okay, it sounds like Anne was first with the second.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll be second with the second.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Okay, all those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it sounds like the motion carries, and we'll be recommending adoption to the Boulder County Commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job,
Trace.
you guys. Congrats.
Thanks, Trace, and and POSAC, the Boulder County Advisory Committee. We are on to the Lafayette Open Space Advisory Committee. And does anyone in our group have any further discussion, or would anyone like to make a motion?
Dave, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Okay, Josh.
So I recommend that Lafayette City Council approve the Mayhoffer Farm Management Plan project as described and presented by the CU MENV students.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Josh. We have a motion from Josh and a second from Allison. Thank you, Allison. Any discussion about the motion that is on the table? Any comments or discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will take a vote on the motion that Josh made. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, the motion from the Lafayette Open Space Advisory Committee has passed unanimously. Thank you all very much. And let's move on to Louisville Open Space Advisory Board.
All right. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I think Helen already has,
Okay, let's.
and
do
I've
it again for the
seconded.
record. Okay.
So I just want to restate the motion that my motion is that we recommend approval by Louisville City Council of this plan as proposed, with the addition of a land acknowledgement statement in that section, so that it contains a simple statement as well as a commitment to the process.
All right.
And I second
And
that.
Peter has seconded it as usual. All right. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor, let's raise hands so I can actually see.
Aye.
Okay, we got 6. Any opposed? All right. 6-0 passes. I'll hand it back to Dave.
Okay, thank you, Louisville. Thank you, Boulder County. Thank you, CU Masters of the Environment students. And thanks to all the staff on the call. Thank you to our Spanish interpreters and to the public who attended tonight. We appreciate everyone's time and dedication to this really important parcel. And I know we're all excited about the future for this parcel. And this is a step along that way. So thank you all so much for helping out. Is there anything, any other comments that I missed, or anybody want to add to conclude? Tina, anything we need to?
I just have a procedural thing on behalf of Louisville Open Space Board. Do we have anyone who's taking minutes of this? Because I don't see our secretary. And
it's being recorded and it's on YouTube, so I would say that could probably suffice.
Okay, so is Laura gonna do minutes on that, or? Well, okay, I don't need to take time. Just want to make sure that we actually get minutes of this prepared, and we can do that offline.
We'll just put a link in a link to the YouTube video.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to require people who want to find out what our action is to make them sit through 2 hours of this. Totally unfair.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody can capture your motion and your second, and that'll cover it. Good catch though, Peter.
Okay, thanks everybody.
All right.
So seeing no further comments, let me just check the chat real quick. Yeah, thank you all so much once again for attending the meeting and for all of your support for our various communities and our open space resources. And as I will adjourn the meeting at 8:53 p.m. Have a good night, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good evening.